The shadow in the attic. The old Greystone manor had stood on the edge of town for centuries, its towering spires and cracked facade casting a perpetual shadow over the neighborhood. Legend had it the house was cursed, but for Rebecca and her family, it was a fresh start. After years of city living, the promise of a spacious home for a fraction of its worth was too tempting to ignore. The family moved in on a crisp autumn day. Rebecca's 8-year-old son, Jamie, immediately took to exploring the house, his small footsteps echoing through the grand halls. The attic, however, was locked. When he asked about it, Rebecca brushed it off, promising to look for the key later. The first few days in the house were uneventful. The family settled into their routines, and Rebecca began unpacking their belongings. But strange things started happening as the nights grew colder. The whispers. It began with whispers. Soft, almost imperceptible voices seemed to drift down from the attic at night. Rebecca initially blamed the creaking of the old house, but Jamie insisted he could hear words. "They're calling me," he whispered one morning at breakfast, his eyes wide and shadowed from sleepless nights. "They say they want to play." Rebecca dismissed it as a child's overactive imagination, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Objects in the house began to move on their own. Doors slammed shut without warning, and cold drafts swept through rooms, even though the windows were sealed tight. One night, Rebecca awoke to find Jamie standing at the foot of her bed, staring at her with glassy eyes. "The man in the attic says he's lonely," Jamie murmured. "He wants me to visit." Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine. The key. Determined to put an end to the nonsense, Rebecca searched the house for the attic key. She finally found it in an old wooden box in the basement, buried beneath layers of dust and cobwebs. That evening, after Jamie had gone to bed, Rebecca climbed the narrow staircase leading to the attic. The door was heavy, its wood splintered with age. With trembling hands, she turned the key and pushed it open. The attic was freezing, filled with forgotten furniture and boxes covered in sheets. As she stepped inside, her flashlight flickered, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. In the corner of the room stood a large antique mirror, its surface covered in grime. As Rebecca approached, she noticed faint handprints on the glass, as if someone had pressed their palms against it from the other side. Suddenly, the temperature plummeted, and Rebecca's breath fogged in front of her. A low, guttural whisper filled the room. "Leave." Terrified, Rebecca fled the attic, slamming the door behind her. The potion. That night, Jamie disappeared. His bed was empty, the sheets cold and undisturbed. Rebecca and her husband searched the house frantically, their calls echoing unanswered. Finally, they heard laughter coming from the attic, a high-pitched, eerie sound that didn't belong to Jamie. Rebecca burst into the attic to find Jamie standing before the mirror, his small hand pressed against the glass. His reflection didn't match his movements. Instead, it stared at Rebecca with hollow, black eyes and a twisted grin. "He likes me, Mommy," Jamie said in a voice that wasn't his own. "He says I can stay with him forever." Rebecca lunged for her son, but an unseen force threw her back. The mirror shimmered, and a shadowy figure emerged, a tall, skeletal man with elongated limbs and a face that seemed to shift and distort. "You shouldn't have opened the door," the figure hissed, its voice like nails on glass. The escape. Rebecca grabbed Jamie, pulling him away from the mirror. The figure screamed, its shadow stretching across the walls, clawing at them as they fled the attic. The family left the house that night, abandoning everything they owned. Greystone Manor was left to rot, its windows dark and lifeless. But Rebecca knew they hadn't truly escaped. Jamie still talked to the man in the attic, his once bright eyes now dull and distant. And at night, when the house was silent, Rebecca could hear faint whispers, coming from the mirror she had brought with him, hidden in the